All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our organized panel on linguistics in high school pathways towards student engagement. I want to thank everyone for your flexibility, both the presenters and the attendees. I know this has been a difficult change, but we're all here. So I don't want to take too much time with introductions because we want to make sure that we have the time for everyone to present. We have a very exciting panel this morning with a lot of different topics about involving high school students in linguistics. So our first presenter is Amy Plakowski, and I will just let you take it from here.
All right. Okay. So hi, thanks for coming, everybody. My name is Amy Plakowski, and I'm an English teacher at Hudson High School in Hudson, Massachusetts. And today I'm going to talk about teaching linguistics as a core course in high school. In other words, a course that students can take as a graduation requirement, and in this case, in the English department. I'm also the incoming chair of the Linguistics in the School Curriculum Committee of the Linguistic Society of America, and I tweet about teaching high school linguistics, and my Twitter handle is Linguistahawk. A lot of what I'm going to talk about today is in an article that I wrote for an upcoming volume on inclusion in linguistics, edited by Charity Hudley, Mallinson, and Buchholz. And before I start, just a little bit of background on Hudson High School. We're a small blue-collar town in central Massachusetts. We're a public school. We're smallish. We have around 800 students in grades 8 through 12. We are mostly white, around 83%, but we have a really large population of Brazilian and Portuguese immigrants who are Portuguese speakers, who identify as white but are linguistically and culturally minoritized. Around 75% of our students speak a language other than English at home, and that doesn't really include some of the students who identify as heritage speakers of languages other than English, and around 40% of our students qualify as low income. So before I get into the content of this course, just a little background on how we came to offer linguistics as a core English course. So prior to 2020, this is what our program of studies looked like for juniors and seniors. Linguistics, we had two electives called linguistics and media literacy, and then we had some other options that juniors and seniors could take as core English classes. In 2020, or just prior to 2020, we had some budget cuts, and we lost some members of our English department. We didn't have enough teachers to offer all of the electives that we had offered. So we got a little creative, and we developed an elective model for junior and senior English. So we offered all of these choices listed on the screen as core English courses for juniors or seniors. Creative writing and journalism stayed as electives, but the linguistics and media literacy class got combined into a class that now we call linguistics and media studies, that juniors and seniors can take at a regular level or an honors level. So when linguistics was an elective, around 20 to 30 students took the course every year. It wasn't necessarily offered every semester, and that's out of around 300 students who were able to take who were eligible to take linguistics. Now that it's a core course, we have around 75 to 80 students taking it each year. So the transition obviously met with some challenges. We were moving, first of all, from a semester to a full year. We needed to integrate linguistics and media studies, these two disparate classes, into a way that didn't feel like it was two courses stuck together. And we also needed to fulfill the requirements of a core English course as kind of dictated by the Common Core. So we also had to work in reading and writing instruction, fiction, nonfiction, poetry, vocabulary. And because of scheduling, it couldn't just be taught by me. It had to be able to be taught by any teacher, regardless of how much linguistics background they had. And it needed to meet the needs of a much more diverse population of students. So we needed to meet the needs of students on education plans, students with learning disabilities, English language learners, and students who weren't planning to attend a four-year college. But this really, we saw this as an opportunity, especially in the last couple of years, as there's been a growing awareness of the need for culturally responsive anti-racist courses in all subjects. And so we didn't have to retrofit a course, an already existing course, to include, all these different anti-racist foundations. We could build the course on a culturally responsive anti-racist foundation. So back in 2019, I presented here at the LSA about using the Understanding by Design curriculum framework to develop what was then my elective. And these were the essential questions that I had for the course. They were, what does a person know when they know a language, and how do they acquire that knowledge? What attitudes and beliefs do we have about language individually and as a society? How do those attitudes develop, and how do they influence our worldview? Are our ideas about language supported by evidence, and how can we test those ideas scientifically? And these really did remain the essential questions for this course as well. So back when I taught this course as an elective, my units looked pretty similar to what I had experienced as an undergrad in intro linguistics courses, beginning with phonology, morphology, syntax, moving on to language acquisition, semantics, pragmatic sociolinguistics. But as we were kind of building this course from the ground up, I wanted to think about how the course could be more student-centered, more inquiry-based, and how to show immediate relevance of linguistics to students' lived experiences. So I thought about the podcasts and the books and the documentaries about linguistics that I really enjoyed, that that my students got excited by when I shared with them. And I realized that what those resources were doing wasn't organizing linguistics by subfield, but presenting audiences with a question, a problem, a case study that could be analyzed more deeply using concepts from linguistics. So I shifted the units from units based on subfields to units based on those questions or problems or case studies. There were some advantages to this. It could be taught, I think these thematic units can be kind of picked up and moved to almost any discipline like science or psychology. A teacher doesn't have to be a linguistics major in order to teach the course. And I also think more broadly, I think we do students a real disservice by breaking down disciplines breaking down knowledge into content areas like science, math, English, history, because what kids have really loved about linguistics, in my experience, is that it pulls together all of these disciplines, the sciences, the humanities, music, psychology, media literacy, all of those things. And it shows them that those fields are not fragmented, that they really are in conversation with each other. So here's how I did it. Here's how I decided what my thematic units would be and how to organize them. So I wrote down every single linguistics term, concept, resource, everything that I used on a Post-it note. And then I took a big piece of chart paper and I thought about what were some of the most interesting projects and documentaries and topics and things that we covered in my linguistics class, and those became my thematic units. And then I took those Post-it notes and I kind of sorted them to kind of see where they would best fit and how they would help students access those themes. So what were the themes? I came up with 10, and I'm going to talk you through them briefly here. On the left side of the slide are the essential questions for that particular unit. And then on the right side are the topics and subfields in linguistics that are addressed through the unit. So the first unit I called Descriptivism and Prescriptivism in the Public Sphere. So students examine attitudes and beliefs that people have about language, where they come from. They find examples of prescriptivism or language policing in school, in the media, especially in social media. And this is also where we introduce a lot of those basic linguistics concepts like grammar and syntax and prescriptivism and ideology. Our second unit is called GENIE, Language, Science, and Ethics. And this gives us a way to introduce syntax and psycholinguistics and language acquisition. And then also to talk about ethical considerations and how we do research that has scientific validity and what conclusions we can draw from that. This year, having gone through this unit a couple of times, we felt that focusing a whole unit on GENIE with high school students could sometimes feel a little lurid, not necessarily trauma informed, and sometimes guilty of the exploitation that we were asking students to question. So next year, we're going to focus a little bit more on issues of language deprivation more broadly, and we can integrate discussions of deafness and the effects of colonization on Indigenous languages. Unit 3 is called The Myth of the 30 Million Word Gap. And I like to think of linguistics in high school as a lot of language myth busting. And so this unit addresses a lot of the myths related to multilingualism, including the 30 million word gap. We show students how how science can influence public policy and why it's so important that research and also reporting on that research, how important that is to have integrity. And this is also a unit that my multilingual students have often found affirming in ways that they don't always get in other classes. And I'll talk a little bit about that towards the end of the presentation. Our invention, our fourth unit is called The Invention of the American Language. This is where we do a lot of the socio stuff and a lot of the dialects. And kids love talking about dialects. But I wanted to talk about dialects in ways that it wasn't just descriptive about dialects, but could look at the whole issue in a more critical way. So in looking at dialects, we're also looking at the history of language in America, and that begins with Indigenous languages and colonization. We talk about the minoritization of some language varieties while other language varieties are privileged, and we look at how language and identity are connected. We also zoom in and talk about Black language in a lot of detail. And because this is such a huge topic, I focused it a lot on what I call Black language on trial. So this is particularly through the lens of Black language in the courts, especially how misconceptions about Black language sometimes influence the outcome of the trial, like the George Zimmerman trial. And also when Black language was metaphorically on trial, like in the Oakland and Ann Arbor cases. Our gender unit is called Policing Bodies, Policing Voices. We look at how gender and language are discussed in the media, especially most recently things like pronouns and also things like vocal fry and uptalk. We look at how LGBTQ voices are silenced and appropriated in history and popular culture. And then we also talk about marketing and branding and how marketing and branding reinforce and duplicate existing power structures through language. From there, we move on to marketing and manipulation, most specifically the language of marketing and branding. We hit semantics and pragmatics really hard here. And then we also, this gives us an opportunity to loop back to talk about what we've learned about phonology and syntax and things like that. And then this, of course, kind of segues into a discussion of how those same techniques are used by politicians, activists, and the media. We look at how language might contribute to radicalization. And we talk a lot, we've been talking about January 6th and using concepts like speech acts, implicature, dog whistles to develop a framework about how to talk about things like January 6th. We have an ongoing unit. We talk about vocabulary throughout the year. Again, the Common Core standards for English have a vocabulary strand. But rather than just giving kids words to memorize and testing them on it, I wanted to think about how we could approach vocabulary from a linguistic standpoint. So we do this mostly through morphology and through historical linguistics. So we look at how languages change, how lexicons evolved, how the history of English reflects histories of colonization and oppression. And then we also take a morphological approach that empowers students to be able to break up words into, break up unknown words into parts and determine meaning, and allow students to get creative with their own word formation. And then our other ongoing unit is literature-based. So we have students form book clubs and they read young adult fiction and memoir that deals with specifically characters' linguistic identity and how that interacts with their identities as a whole, and then also how the authors portray linguistic identity. And these are the choices that we've given students this year. They meet in a group, they choose a book, and then they meet periodically to discuss the book, specifically again about those issues of language and identity. Obviously, we met with some challenges, and the biggest one was, of course, COVID-19. Last year, we switched between hybrid, remote, and fully in person. This year, we're still masked and socially distanced, which is a good thing, but also puts a lot of limitations on things like group projects and discussions and hands-on activities. And there has been, because of the pandemic, high rates of student absenteeism, and then also, much more prominent issues of student trauma. And those are all complicating factors and really, judging the efficacy of this course. And I think there's also a challenge, we talk about how could we make this scalable to other high schools. And the fact is that in order to teach linguistics, high school teachers need to have a background in linguistics. And a lot of teachers don't have the background to do that comfortably. But I do think that this thematic approach can help. If we want students to be exposed to linguistics before college, we need more resources that are accessible to both teachers and high school students. But despite those challenges, I do think that this approach has been largely successful. Here are some of the student testimonials that I got last year at the end of the year. One student said, for next year's students, I would tell them to be excited at all the information they will learn that connects to their daily life. Take in every minute because of how interesting all the information is. And not many classes in high school can connect this much to our everyday life and make us better people. Another student said, before I thought there was a correct way to speak, as that's what I was taught growing up. I thought that my and other people's grammar had to be perfect. Otherwise, that was a sign of unintelligence. I honestly wasn't even educated at all about other dialects. I didn't even know there was a name for it. And then one student just wrote, I wish they had taught us this stuff a long time ago. It was also really encouraging to see that students of non-privileged language varieties really felt affirmed in this class. One student wrote, my favorite topic was definitely learning about Black language because I already speak Black language and have my whole life. So I found it very interesting seeing my classmates try to learn the way I talk and understand it. And then I had another student, she's a Portuguese speaker, who said, this course touched a place deep in my heart. My dad always pushed us to learn English and speak it in the house as well as outside the house. I believe my father wanted to let his kids have the best American experience possible, but apparently that meant pushing away so much of our culture. So despite our challenges, I do think this class has been a success. I think it's going to continue to evolve as the years go on. And I am available for any questions or to share any resources. And again, I tweet about teaching high school linguistics at Linguistic. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Amy. We'll do questions at the end. So we'll go to the next presentation. And I'm pleased to introduce Tatiana Yudovina and Nick Boros.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. So I just want to start by introducing us and our background. So we're both math teachers by day, so which is somewhat unusual. I don't have any formal linguistics background. It has been my hobby, linguistics and languages. I'm kind of mainly self-taught in this area. And I had this idea a while ago to use constructed languages as a framework for creating a linguistics course. And I always felt like I don't have enough formal linguistics background to do it on my own. And then when Nick joined our faculty and I saw on his resume that he has formal training in linguistics, I was like, yes, this is going to happen now. So which is what happened. So Nick is going to give you an overview of the class in general, and then we're going to go into some details about what we do.
All right, thank you, Tatiana. There we go. So I'll begin by mentioning that our experience teaching linguistics as independent school teachers is unique in that we don't have to deal with any administrative barriers. Our administrators encourage us to experiment with novel course offerings, and this happens during the last 3 weeks of every semester in a format that's called intensives, which offers specialty courses not traditionally offered to high schoolers. They're called intensives because students devote the entirety of this period to exploring the topic of the class. Tatiana and I developed this course during the summer and fall of 2019 to introduce our high school students to the world of linguistics. The course covers the equivalent of an introductory linguistics course, but condenses it into a 3-week period during which students are exposed to the main branches of theoretical linguistics and explore topics in the applied and interdisciplinary subfields of linguistics. Throughout the course, students apply the skills learned in class by incrementally developing their own constructed language, a component that has consistently proved to be one of students' favorite features in the course. Thus far, we've only run 2 offerings of the course, one in 2019 and again, most recently last month. And the first time we ran it, we only had juniors and seniors, but most recently we had the entire range of high schoolers from freshmen through seniors. And we really focus on a lot of the technical skills because we want to show students that linguistics is different from the way that they approach language in their foreign language classes or an English class. But we also do that to expose them to the breadth of possibilities so that present in the world's languages to incorporate into their own languages.
I would like to mention that the way we approach assessment and grading in this class, and also in many of our other classes at our school, is mastery based. So we try, especially in a class like that, when we teach them something very different from the rest of their curriculum, we try to take emphasis away from the grades. We don't have formal tests and quizzes. They have assignments they can work on. They can resubmit their work and ask for help and resubmit the work until they meet our expectations. And we only have a 3-week time span, so there's only so much we can cover in enough detail so we can assess on it. And these are some examples of what those topics are. We also talk about a lot of applied linguistics topics that we don't necessarily have a formal assessment on, but we look at like phonetics, phonology, morphology, and syntax and writing systems. We'll talk about it a little bit separately. And so they do have to be able to complete formal technical problems, at least with help, as one of the things we expect.
So as an example of the expectations and rigors we had for students, here are the learning objectives we have for our syntax unit. So we opened the unit with a review of syntactic categories, discussed various constituency tests for English phrases, and had students draw tree diagrams according to X-bar theory, even at the level of determiner phrases. Teaching such an involved concept to freshmen, some of whom were not particularly interested in the more technical exercises, might seem to be a very high bar for high schoolers, but we differentiated our expectations for various groups of students. At minimum, we expected all students to diagram shorter phrases, and those who were more technically inclined could diagram more involved sentences. Along the way, students were allowed to resubmit assignments, as Tatiana mentioned, and seek our support until the expectations were met.
So as we mentioned, constructed languages play a large role in our class. So we use it as a framework to organize the topics. And basically, when we introduce the topics, we immediately ask them to create that portion of their constructed language. And students get an appreciation of kind of hands-on appreciation of how these areas of linguistics work and why they're necessary to describe a language. One reason we introduce conlangs, they create an opportunity for teamwork and a bonding experience. We have them develop languages in small groups, and we have these small groups have their own secret language that they can talk to each other, but nobody else would understand. So it's just really fun. And there are a lot of places where students could be creative. One area is they really love creating scripts for their languages. But also just the world building element. They have to create a background about like little story about the world where that language is spoken. So they really, some kids get really into that aspect of it. And you see some examples. There is like a creature that speaks the language that's being invented. And all these little pictures and scripts appear on our whiteboard, which we really enjoy watching. We also have them show their understanding of the language diversity through their constructed languages. They are challenged to create something that's unlike a regular human language. So they have to show their understanding of what is already there among natural languages and create something that is somewhat different. We also want to give credit to Dr. Wells Jensen from Bowling Green State University, who had taught a course on constructed languages at her school, and she allowed us to use some of her materials and base our materials on hers. So at the same time, so it's kind of really fun element for the kids, but also there's a lot of formal assessment going on through constructing the languages. And what we notice is we introduce these technical skills, and some students are initially resistant to them, but they really begin to use them spontaneously, not just like on a test and a quiz. We look around the room and we have a lot of writable white spaces in the room. And by week 3, we see students just spontaneously, as they talk to each other and explain concepts to each other, tree diagrams appear and the IPA transcriptions and bizarre scripts and things like that. And it just happens naturally, and especially IPA, because it's one of the first topics we introduce in the course. By the end of 3 weeks, they are really fluent in it. They really like talk about it to each other. It's like, I realized my name has the same letter 3 times, but it's a different sound each time. So like they really make connections between like how IPA helps them understand the phonetics of their native language, the language they learn as the second language, and the language they're creating. And so these are some examples from just ongoing work on their constructed languages and some of their final projects. They learn the glossing system, so it's not a requirement to have it. They could gloss informally, but some kids really like it and appreciate the usefulness of that. One of the examples we show, it's perfectly glossed sentences from their constructed language translation challenge. And we do use writing systems mainly because kids really like writing systems. It's not typically part of an introductory linguistics course. But when we tell them, oh, you guys are going to create a language, we immediately see them thinking about scripts. Like they want to imagine those scripts and come up with a new one. So we made it a fairly big unit. We talk about different types of writing systems. We have a challenge. We go to Cleveland Museum of Art, and they have to decipher an Egyptian. They kind of pretend like they're the first decipherers of Egyptian script, and they have to use some artifacts in the museum to decipher it using a Rosetta Stone type document. So they really learn about different types of scripts that do exist, and they create something new and different. And there are some examples also you can see in the illustrations. And they also, we talk a lot about language preservation and language documentation in this course, in other units throughout. And the way they produce the final document for the constructed language kind of parallels the way you would document a minority language or a small language or a dying language. So they kind of follow the same protocol for language documentation. They have to come up with a grammar and dictionary for their constructed language.
So in addition to the conlangs, we had several other engaging activities that we wanted to highlight. One of those was static paletography, a linguistic fieldwork technique used in language documentation to describe the precise place of articulation for coronal consonants. When we first offered this course in 2019, we gave students the choice of either producing a lingogram or a paletogram, But since the latter involves placing specially shaped mirrors in close proximity to the mouth, we decided to only offer the option of lingograms during 2021 in order to create a more COVID compliant experience. Students got to choose the level to which they engage in this activity, since not everyone is comfortable with having their palette painted with a mixture of oil and charcoal or cocoa powder. But we had a fair percentage of the class eagerly volunteer. Those who did not actually produce palograms were responsible for taking photographs, documenting the sounds, and submitting them for analysis by the class. In the images above, the student on left uttered ta to target the t sound, while the student on right uttered nu in order to target the n sound. As you can see, not all the outcomes produced accurate representations, but the experience was still valuable in reinforcing some of the concepts we covered in our articulatory phonetics unit. For example, target sound selection reviewed place of articulation in selecting a coronal consonant, and vowel height in selecting a syllable that would not obscure the target sound during contact between tongue and palate.
Another fun activity we have, we do our own version of the famous rug test based on the original research by Jean Gleason from 1958. In 2019, pre-COVID, when we ran that project, we had students design their own test interview instrument. So they had to come up with their own list of invented words that uses the same phonological has the same phonological qualities as the ones used in the original test. They had to figure out why these particular words used. And we were able to team up with our own, our school is pre-K through 12, so we could team up with our own pre-K students and use them as our subjects. This year was a little bit more difficult because our younger students are not vaccinated yet. So we actually were able to use faculty children in the age group 4 to 7 and had a small group. So they got a hands-on experience creating a research instrument, conducting the interviews, recording, analyzing the experimental data. And there was a really fun element because they actually had to create a booklet with the illustration that illustrates those imaginary creatures that correspond to the invented words and various strange actions they performed that corresponded to invented verbs. So there was like just kind of fun elements to it and creative element to it, but also they got a hands-on exposure to conducting research.
Another engaging activity was a mock linguistic fieldwork experience. So during a unit on language preservation, we watched the documentary The Linguist, during which students saw David Harrison and Gregory Anderson conduct linguistic fieldwork. As a culminating activity during the third week, we gave students the opportunity to apply their analytic skills to determine some basic grammatical elements of Hungarian. We chose Hungarian because it was a language that is very structurally different from other languages spoken or being learned by any of the students in the course. Through their elicitation, students were able to determine certain morphological features and basic elements of word order. For example, they discovered that Hungarian adjectives are generally prenominal, that the language contains postpositions rather than prepositions, and that is a pro-drop language. Most impressive was their discovery of how pluralization works. In Hungarian, if a quantifier precedes a noun, then the regular plural suffix is omitted, which surprised many of the students. It was also wonderful to see how engaged students were as they worked together toward a common goal that involved collaborative brainstorming, comparing notes, and revising hypotheses. Additionally, this activity gave them firsthand experience of the various difficulties encountered in the field, such as the potential misinterpretation of images or gestures, which I recognize has happened as a Hungarian speaker, or the difficulty of listening concepts like tense. And at the very end of the course, during our evaluations, 2 students in particular highlighted this element as one of their favorites in the course. In addition to having this world of fantasy through conlangs, we also stress the real world application of linguistics and how it can address societal problems, such as language preservation and language discrimination. So during the course, students had the opportunity to engage with guest speakers who have firsthand experience with working in these areas. So among those guest speakers, we had Tyler Whitaker, a tribal linguist for the Tunica Biloxi tribe, Christine Beyer from UC Berkeley, who had shared her linguistic and humanitarian efforts among various Amazonian tribes, and Kathy Sierra, a Cherokee language teacher who is also chairwoman for the Cherokee Language Consortium. And we also had Frances Cooley, a Hawken alumna who recently acquired her PhD, who talked to students about the linguistics of sign languages and aspects of deaf culture. Regarding language discrimination, we conducted a dialect bias test to help students realize their implicit biases and discuss the manifestations of this discrimination. We also discussed aspects of African American English and watched the documentary Talking Black in America.
So just to cover a few other things we did that were not covered yet, we did take them to visit an undergraduate linguistics class, and they really enjoyed the fact that it could actually understand some of the topics being discussed. We had a project creating IPA chart, kind of hands-on. You see a picture of it. It was in our class at all times, so we could use it for reference. We had a number of guest speakers, like one person that haven't been mentioned before. I will mention Dr. Wells Jensen, who helped us with our constructed language unit. She also visited us remotely, and one of her areas is interesting. It's a xenolinguistic, is the possible communications with other species out in the outer space, and like the projects that plan for that. And we'll watch the film Arrival, which you're probably all familiar with, and it was very interesting connection because she would be that person who would be like taken in a helicopter to the base. So because she kind of had that talk to us about that experience. We mentioned the Egyptian hieroglyphics activity, and one thing that we did, we improved probably from the first time we ran the class to the second. We gave students more choice in doing some individual research, so we saved more time towards the end of the class, and students had a choice to continue working and extending their constructed language projects or do something else. And we had slightly more than half of the students chose to continue working on their constructed language, while other students decided to kind of dive deeper into a topic that we either only touched upon or haven't. So we had one student at some point, it was mentioned, got really interested in the work of Deborah Tanner about the genderlect, and then we had students researching minority languages and just the area of psycholinguistics. So we haven't had a chance to talk enough about. Two students did an exercise in comparative linguistics, so they just tried out different things we didn't have enough time to cover. We got very positive feedback from the students. First time going into, we kind of didn't know how it's going to go. It was so different from some students didn't really know what they signed up for. They had really big idea what linguistics is, and we're two math teachers, and they kind of assumed it's maybe some kind of math class. But we had really overwhelmingly positive response. Some of the examples you see here, just overall, they appreciated the fact that that's something that's not generally taught, and that they had an opportunity to get a pretty thorough exposure to a subject that is not typically taught in high school. They appreciated especially in the first year, we had more opportunities to go off campus and bring speakers in person as opposed to on Zoom. And the second comment, of course, was our favorite, that this course is very disappointing because it will make all future intensive pale in comparison. So it made us very happy to read this one. So the intensives, as Nick mentioned, is something they do experience twice a year, and it's always something somewhat unusual and different from your typical high school curriculum. So some things we were thinking about, we keep working and trying to improve. So we don't really publicize the class enough. A lot of kids don't really know, like the word linguistics, they really don't know what that is. So we need to come up with a better way to promote it so the kids who would be interested in it know about it and sign up for it. And one of the main challenges we have, there are a lot of advantages in teaching a 3-week intensive when the kids could immerse in the topic all day long. And that's the only class they have to worry about during that time. At the same time, it's a very short time period, and we tend to pack a lot. So both times we taught the class, at the end of it, we looked back and it's like, did we really cover all of this in 3 weeks? And we feel it's a little bit too much. So we're trying to strike that right balance between exposing them thoroughly to a lot of areas of linguistics, but also not like rush through a lot of things and giving them enough hands-on experiences. I think we should give up, right? Some other ideas covered there.
So we'd love, at the end of the talk, if you have any questions, we'd be happy to answer them. And if you would like to reach us by email, here are our email addresses. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. And yeah, with these presentations are being recorded, and then we can share the contact information and more love at the end and questions. So our next presenter is Christina Procaccino. So I'm going to just let you take it from here, Christina.
All right. Hi, good morning. Thank you so much. I'm Christina Procaccino. I'm a Latin teacher in Fairfax County, Virginia, and I'm also a PhD student in the Multilingual Multicultural Education Program at George Mason University. My work with high school linguistics students has been very much in the extracurricular sphere. So I'm very excited to talk to you about my work so far in helping to create a national linguistics organization for high school students. And I teach in a very large and highly bureaucratic school system where it's very difficult to try to get new elective courses designed if they are not directly aligned with the AP or IB curricula. So rather than try to start with a course, I've, for the past 10 years, sponsored an after-school linguistics club. And the activities of the after-school club have varied, but generally include things like participating in the NACLO competition, learning about language taxonomies, learning the IPA, language games, and sometimes students choose to focus on really dedicating time to trying to learn a new language together. But in the classics world, we have a very large and active national student organization, which provides students with scholarship opportunities, enrichment, networking, and leadership opportunities. And I strongly believe that being a part of such a community really fosters a true intrinsic appreciation of that content area and subject material and greater buy-in from students. So it was really important for me to try to maybe create something similar for linguistics for high school students. And some reasons that this is something that I'm very passionate about and want to contribute towards is I do believe that such an organization will help to just generally increase student awareness of linguistics, provide more enrichment opportunities for K-12 students and teachers. It would be aligned with the practices of many other academic fields and professional organizations, and helps to build a foundation for increasing linguistics programming at the K-12 level. We have heard in our initial outreach from our students that really they might be the only person in their friend group who has heard of linguistics so far. They're not sure if their teachers know of it. I'm sure they do, but it's not something that's being publicized maybe at the school. And so kind of having these back channels and something else that they can attach themselves to can kind of help to bring linguistics into more schools. But there are several challenges in trying to create such an organization. So the main challenge is that linguistics is not part of the mainstream K-12 curriculum. In fact, we find that in many cases, in some of the content areas that would typically be considered to be aligned with linguistics, like English or world language, some of those more up-to-date curricula and practices are trending away from teaching explicit linguistic skills. And so really trying to build a case for linguistics is really important. It's difficult to really organize events and to try to find a time even that works for people, because so far the membership and the students we've been able to connect with have been so widespread. And generally such organizations are affiliated with a professional organization or educational institution to provide some legitimacy and credibility. So it's difficult to attract new members at a certain level if we're just kind of this unofficial organization as we are so far. But I started attending the LSA annual meeting a few years ago and was really welcomed right away at the Linguistics in the School Curriculum Committee meeting and the AP Linguistics Committee meeting. And I was really inspired by the work that the members were doing. So I asked if perhaps we could petition the LSA to found a Junior Linguistic Society of America. And so that is something that we have proposed. Last year at the annual meeting, there were several high school students in attendance. And so after the meeting, I reached out to those students and we decided to try to run some events just on our own while waiting to hear if our proposal for the JLSA would be approved. Now, many of these students were also coming from a Latin background and had some experience participating in quiz bowls. So we decided to start with creating a linguistics quiz bowl competition. We created social media accounts to find participants. On the social media accounts, we created practice questions. So you can see an example of one there. It was really important to us as well to try to highlight languages and any special language days that might be coming up on the calendar. And also we had social questions each week because, again, we felt that maybe a lot of these students weren't meeting other students who are also interested in linguistics. So just to try to foster some of these relationships. We also really tried to do our part to highlight any less commonly taught languages, endangered languages, indigenous languages, and connected with some, I don't know if you can have official language Twitter accounts, but official language accounts to try to highlight specific languages as well. So this all really started not even a year ago in the spring. So we then hosted our first Linguistics Bowl at the end of April, and we had over 50 participants from all over the world. The quiz bowls were run in a typical quiz bowl style, sort of like it's academic, with toss-up and bonus questions about a variety of linguistics topics. We recruited most of our participants from social media, but also some of the students who had volunteered to help out had participated in the SLICE and NSLI-Y programs. And so they had connections with students who had participated in other youth linguistics programs. And we sort of branched out that way. And after that first bowl, we had some fortuitous connections made. We were really honored to be a part of the LingFest. And so it was kind of a quick turnover, but we had our second Linguistics Bowl just the week after our first Linguistics Bowl. And we've now run 3 subsequent linguistic bowls with over 100 registrants from 36 countries. And as part of this as well, during the time in which we're repitting students and working who's competing against each other between rounds, we really like to try to promote other linguistics opportunities that are happening. So any talks that we know about, internships, camps, competitions that are happening, we really try to highlight. It's so important to us that we're all kind of in this together, trying to build up this collective community of high school students, rather than trying to do anything to cause division or compete for students. Some more example questions, just if you're interested, but they're all about a large variety of topics. Typically the linguistics bowls so far, because we've been a small team, have been 2 rounds of 15 to 20 questions. So at this point, after our linguistics bowls, we had a following of about 100 students, and they were really asking us for more programming. So we decided to take on a summer tournament of fun. And it ran throughout the entire month of July. It included academic talks about a variety of topics, scavenger hunts, linguistics room, or escape rooms, movie nights every Friday, topic workshops, a book club, social gatherings, NACLO training, a linguistics bowl, a speed lane competition. We hosted a language learning challenge where students could practice together either Indonesian, Greek, or Arabic. And then we created assessments for students to sort of see which group had been able to learn the most. We know that there are many flaws with that design, but they had a lot of fun trying to do that. And we had over 150 registrants from dozens of countries. So just to show you some of our artifacts from that, from our speed lang showcase, I'm just going to show you a video of some of the conlangs that students created. And one of the tasks, it was a 3-day competition. They had to design a language in 3 days. And one of the tasks was to say, have a great summer in their constructed language. So I'm just going to play that quick clip for you.
The last requirement that everyone had to do was to write down and record how a speaker of their language would wish another speaker a great summer. Have a great summer, guys.
Diolma bikal pakli klaseda.
Losimi pinubar unlana imbilidui.
Lamulal khai kwa wanju sa hu chani.
Me bene isimi bison tenon.
Uyila, ufigo, uniusafuhia, haniusafuhia.
Savitho laya kuanama. Nanda shemon nimishimon beyai.
All right, some of the other things, just for some more artifacts for you to see what we did. Students had arts and crafts where they had to make a syntax diagram for a language other than English of their choice. So we have an example here with Greek. They had to create new tongue twisters in English and explain the rationale for why they chose those tongue twisters. So you can see 2 of the tongue twisters that were created at the bottom right. We had a baking competition where they had to create some baked good that was reflective of linguistics. And they also had to do a research about any local languages around where they were joining us from. So we had a lot of fun with that. We had hoped to take a short break, but we were, one participant had a lot of positive feelings about the summer tournament of fun and wanted to transition really quickly into a new event. So Tarun Balaji, one of our participants, wanted to host an academic conference for teenagers. So we created the Teen Academic Linguistics Conference, or TALK, and we were absolutely shocked to have over 330 registrants for this event. It was hosted over 3 days. We had a variety of virtual seminars and lectures, and there was a real focus on linguistics for beginners because over 55% of the registrants considered themselves to be linguistics beginners. So at this point, we have reached over 500 students ranging from 11 to 19 years old from all around the world, and some of them are joining us in the session this morning. And some of them are in person there in DC. So please, I think they have a special badge to say that they're a high school student. So please say hi to them if you happen to see them and are there in person. We met our youngest 11-year-old participant in an online Conlang group, and he was trying to get feedback on creating his language. But the majority of our students who are participating are high school juniors. And again, interestingly, the majority of our participants consider themselves to be beginners, but I will say that our most active participants already possess an extremely high level of what I would consider kind of linguistics background or foundational knowledge. They've been really instrumental in helping to run some of these initial seminars and overviews for the younger students or the less experienced students. And many of our student participants are already participating in research projects of their own. Students have created nonprofit educational organizations for teaching linguistics to others and providing more information about linguistics clubs. They've been teaching linguistics courses to other students, and many of them hope to study linguistics in the future. So a bigger goal of this is that we've really been trying to collect as much data as possible to plan while we're planning our events, because we want to make sure that our programming really reflects the desires and the needs and the interests of the students who are participating. But also we're hoping to use this information to maybe help to invest in future linguistics programming, and I'm happy to share any of this information with other groups who are interested to learn more about who's participating, what are they really interested in. But there is a really deep interest and desire on the part of these high school students to get involved in linguistics and to learn more. So now we have many plans in the works for our little group. We have a newsletter that we're going to get working on called The Descriptivist. Was really disappointed that they passed up the name the Washington Post, which we were really hoping for. We would like to have college fairs, host a national linguistics exam. I'd really like to see us be at other professional organizational conferences. We are putting together a high school field journal to kind of help students who might be in linguistics courses or just interested in linguistics keep track of maybe speech acts that they're seeing or interesting idioms that they're hearing or slang words, just to kind of be more mindful of linguistics around them. And then starting to use this data that we're collecting as part of larger statistical analyses for creating kind of a portrait of a high school linguistics student to help maybe guide future work that any of us might take on. So this group of students has just been fantastic. We have had several students tell us that they have started linguistics clubs at their high schools this year, which is what we are really hoping for, to perhaps in the future have more linguistics courses run at the schools, which would help to broaden our impact and spread the word about linguistics. You can see here we have some general feedback from some of our events and what they like about it. I like the last one. What do you like about these events? The fact that it exists. And again, I really, so many of the students tell us that they just haven't met other students who are interested in linguistics, and they're really excited to kind of find their community. So moving forward, we'd really like to continue to grow and legitimize. As I said before, I'm hoping that our informal surveys can be used to help guide future programming. But we're at a point where it would be really helpful to have some additional help. Either an official organization that we're affiliated with or a university. We're at the point where we really need to start collecting membership fees to help pay for some of the programming, our website, the awards that we give out. And this would also help us to establish that credibility and legitimacy in moving forward. We'd really like to see some more large scale events for our students, maybe competitions, contests, or more seminars. And we're really looking to continue to foster relationships between schools, teachers, and universities. And while we may not be working with professors quite yet, we've been really fortunate to work with several linguistics undergraduate clubs and societies. And there's really just such an interest on the part of the students to explore specific linguistics fields and topics. So anyone who might be interested in helping to foster or to allow for shadowing opportunities or research mentorship for students, I know that they would really appreciate that. So this work really would not have been possible without the help of others. So I must give a huge thank you to the 7 high school students, 2 of whom are now college students, who have dedicated hundreds of hours of their own time to organize these events. It's really just been about a team of 8 of us who have tried to tackle all of this so far. So we do need your help. So thank you to Anastasia, Arnav, Chloe, David, Aaron, James, and Manu. This would not have happened without you all. And thank you so much to LISC and APLC for welcoming us, your work and paving the way, and your support throughout. So if you'd like to get more involved or learn more about our work, please feel free to contact me either via email or Twitter. Thank you so much.
Wow, thank you. Okay, so our last presentation, last but not least, Daniel Ginsberg is going to talk to us. And after that, we will have some time for questions.
Great, thank you. So my name is Daniel Ginsberg. I'm Director of Education and Professional Practice at the American Anthropological Association. And my title is Socializing High School Students in the Academic Enterprise. First, a word for the sake of accessibility. If you can't see me for whatever reason, I'm a white person with brown hair that goes down to my chin on the left side, red glasses, and I'm wearing a blue suit jacket, a white dress shirt, and a red neck thing. If you need an access copy of my slides, I put this QR code slide in when we thought that we were presenting in person. But I'm also going to put the link into the chat, and you can use that to access a copy of my slides in case you prefer to have the PDF on your own machine locally for whatever reason. So first, I would like to set an intention for this session, for this talk. I have 3 sort of guiding questions. Number 1, how might we make scholarly research accessible to lay audiences, even high school students? Number 2, how might we give students an opportunity to see themselves as experts? And number 3, how might we involve high school students as active participants in our work as linguists? And I put in parentheses anthropologists because, as I said, I work at the AAA, and so I'm talking about this from the perspective of anthropology, but every time I say anthropology in this talk, you could sort of replace that with linguistics, and for the most part, it still works. I myself, even though I work for anthropology, I have a background in linguistics, I consider myself to be a linguistic anthropologist, and I'm really interested in sort of exploring that intersection. The other thing I want to say before I dig into it, thinking of it as a program that we're running from the association is that I think our talks that we have today sort of run on a spectrum from formal to what I would call non-formal education. It's not informal in the sense that you can just drop in like visiting a museum exhibition, but it's non-formal in the sense that it's not for a grade, because we don't have official students enrolled, we don't grant degrees of any kind. But I think that there's a way that we can leverage what students have learned in some of those more formal courses and offer other kinds of opportunities, as Linguist League does, and also as this program that I'm going to talk about today. So first, a little background about the AAA. This is cut and pasted from the association website. Founded in 1902, the American Anthropological Association is the world's largest scholarly and professional organization of anthropologists. It's a sister society to the LSA. Skipping down a little bit, 75% of our members are employed in higher education or students of anthropology. About 25% of our members work in the public, private, and non-governmental sectors beyond the academy. The association is organized into 40 sections, each reflecting specialized domains of knowledge. And I should say also that more than half of those sections each publish their own journal, or about half of those sections each publish their own journal, which is going to be relevant in a minute. So hold that thought. I also want to talk a little bit about myself. This is also cut and pasted from a different part of the AAA website. And so just to contextualize how I came to be doing the work that I'm going to be talking about. Daniel manages the AAA's institutional research program, which studies anthropologists' careers in and out of academia, as well as anthropology education, blah, blah, blah. They support the AAA's fellowship and internship programs, public education initiatives, academic relations and professional services for student members and members working in business, government, and nonprofit settings. So I do a pretty broad range of stuff, but part of the reason that I got the job at the AAA to begin with is that they were interested in expanding their reach in the K-12 setting. And before I was a linguist, I was a high school teacher. The last time that I presented at the LSA was at 2010 in my capacity as a high school teacher, presenting together with Maya Honda, who I saw is in the audience today, or was. So I guess that's foundational to my background and important to thinking about, like, what is our commitment as scholarly societies and as academic social scientists to including and involving high school students in this way. So the prehistory of a high school internship. This is on this slide, you can see a map of transit directions to the American Anthropological Association staff offices in Arlington, Virginia, beginning at Washington Liberty High School. And so it's a 13-minute bus ride from this school that's just up the street from us that happens to have an IB social cultural anthropology program. And they, or he, the IB teacher, at the end of the year, when they have a sort of a 6-week period when they say, all of you seniors, you're disrupting the younger students with your senioritis, get out of here and go do something productive. And so he would connect them with us so that we could just like give his students something to do around the office. So that was a kind of, it was a lot of different things. It was like they would do sometimes like video editing, or just whatever we could find for them to do. But we had this existing relationship with him and we kind of expected to hear from him every year. And these students would come to work with us in some capacity. And then COVID happened. We had 3 students set up to work with us in, we had been talking with them February of 2020 to come and work with us in May. And then March came along and we had to figure out how we might do all of this remotely. And that really got us thinking about this as an opportunity as far as what project that we had going on they might be able to contribute to. This is a question that we would be asking ourselves anyway, but then the question, what can they contribute to remotely? And the answer that we chose is the World on the Move program, which sort of went by on one of the earlier slides. It's one of our public education initiatives. This image on the slide is the landing page of the World on the Move website, understandingmigration.org. You can see a still video clip of looks like a young boy with medium brown skin and black hair smiling for the camera. And then underneath there's a brief description of what the program is, but it's a larger program that we have to improve and foster public understanding of anthropology, specifically of issues of migration and mobility, because those perspectives that we bring to that topic are sort of timeless, but also relevant at this historical moment. And we were thinking about ways that the high school interns, students, might be able to contribute to the work that we're doing on World on the Move. And so the program model that we eventually settled on was to ask them to produce research summaries of scholarly anthropological literature, where the summaries would be accessible to an audience of their peers, maybe because knowing that our students that we're working with are more likely to have studied anthropology. Christina mentioned that linguistics doesn't have an AP or an IB. Anthropology or cultural anthropology does have an IB curriculum. And so we could be working with students who had some background in anthropology. And we thought that over a course of 3 or 4 weeks, we could guide them through reading a scholarly article so that they would understand it well enough to communicate it to an audience of their peers. And so this is basically a 4-week outline of how we did it. The first year that we've done this in 2020 and again in 21. In 2020, week 1 is choose 2 scholarly articles to work on. Week 2 is write outlines of your articles. Week 3 is write a research summary, which that's not really a well-established genre, but we'll talk a little bit in a minute about how we define that. And then it turned out that there was a lot of work we had to do with them after the fact. They had written this thing, but it wasn't quite ready for publication. And so in 2021, we added a 4th week where we really work with them more intensively on revisions so that we can publish it on our website. So I'm going to walk through each of these phases one by one to give you a sense of how it went. So number 1, choose 2 scholarly articles to work on. That's when our 20-some journals that the AAA produces come in handy. This page that you're looking at now, it's a screenshot of the AnthroSource website, anthrosource.onlinelibrary.wiley.com, which is the one-stop portal for all of the journals that the AAA and AAA sections produce. And you can see a list of few of the titles at the bottom of the screen: American Anthropologist, American Ethnologist, Anthropology and Education Quarterly, Feminist Anthropology, and so on. What we realized is that high school students don't really have academic library access. They don't have access to scholarly journals, but we can give them membership in our association, and that gives them access to all of these journals. And so what we asked them to do is to say, you studied a little bit of anthropology, you have an idea of what you're interested in, find something in the recent research literature that interests you. Because we really want it to be driven by their interest and by what they see as relevant. Recognizing that can also be sort of paralyzing to have that much choice, to have 20 some odd journals to look through. We said it should be within the last 5 years or so. And also it should have something to do with migration and mobility. Because any field of anthropology is going to have something related to migration and mobility in some way. And so somewhere in that intersection, they'll find something that they're interested in. And so, for example, here's one of the articles that was chosen by one of the students in our first cohort. The title is Neocolonialism and Healthcare Access Among Marshall Islanders in the United States by Michael R. Duke. And that was published in 2017 in Medical Anthropology Quarterly. And so during that first week, really, they meet with AAA staff who help them learn how to use the database interface on the AnthroSource website. They meet 3 times a week to just check in with us and with one another to compare notes on how things are going. And then by the end of the week, they're expected to have chosen 2 articles to work on, so that if they start working on one and it doesn't pan out for whatever reason, they have a backup ready and they don't need to start over from scratch. And now here's where the linguistics comes in. In week 2, I sort of build this session or this talk on Twitter by saying, you can come for the critical digital pedagogy and non-formal education and stay for the genre structure analysis. We wanted to help them understand in week 2, they have to read that article and understand what the structure of an academic article is. And so this is really the outline that's showing on the screen right now. Step 1, optionally an ethnographic vignette. Step 2, an introduction that breaks down into the background, who and where, and the methods, how and why the research was done. Part 3, the argument that the paper is making. Part 4, the evidence that's provided. Part 5, a discussion that says, what does this mean? And part 6, a conclusion that says, why does it matter? This is an outline that I worked together with the high school interns to develop on their own or collaboratively to give them a sense of what phases should they expect to see as they're going through this article. If you're a novice to reading academic literature, it can be super overwhelming, just the vocabulary alone. And so if you have some ways of signposting it along the way, it helps to scaffold that process for them. And so we talked about that more or less explicitly, down to the level of like, what kinds of verb tenses and pronouns do you see? Although I don't have time to get into that level of detail. But then this was the outline that they had to produce by the end of week 2, so that then they could report to us and to the other student in their cohort. It was cohorts of 2, I think I forgot to mention, to say what they are reporting on and what the general content of it is. And then for the 3rd week, the question is, what's a research summary? And we wanted to get into a question with them of, the structure of the academic report is really for scholars communicating with other scholars. If you give this whole long lit review of everyone else who has ever done research on this topic, that's only valuable to people who are familiar with it, who are seeing how this participates in this sort of scholarly conversation that people like to talk about. If we're trying to do some sort of a summary for lay audiences instead, we're looking for another genre that we can hang it on that already exists. And what we decided to show them is science communication featured journalism. And so, for example, in the 2021 cohort, we looked at this article in the Washington Post. And so what you see on your screen now is a screenshot of the landing page of that article. The headline is "How Zoom Killed the Fine Art of Interrupting," by Rachel Kurzius. And there's a editorial graphic there that shows someone raising their hand, but pixelated, someone blurred and with a sort of loading icon in front of their face, and the third person sitting with her hand to her forehead, sort of in exasperation. This was, a topic that was of interest to me. I had been noticing since I was trained in conversation analysis that when you can't really overlap because the buffer doesn't permit it, that it changes the way that people take turns and the length of turn taking. And so I was kind of interested to get into that topic with the student interns, but also just that the structure of this article was something that they could look at that would show them a structure that they might be able to use to write their research summaries. And so they also, similar to what we'd done in week 2, in week 3, we wrote another outline for how this article went. Step 1 being a specific story. So-and-so had this experience that might be familiar to you. Step 2 is to zoom out from there into a general phenomenon. They're not alone. Everyone is experiencing this these days. Step 3 is a technical idea. If you talk to linguists, they call it blah, blah, blah. Step 4 as expert voices. We interviewed this one linguist who defined the term. And then part B, we interviewed this other linguist who defines it somewhat differently. Step 5 is a sort of a flip the script move that says, this thing that we identified as a problem, maybe we should be thinking about it differently, or maybe it's good actually, or maybe it helps us to understand the world in a better way, or some kind of a thing. And then in part 6, it loops back around to that specific story from 1 and reevaluates it in some way. And then we talked a lot about the ways that these 2 structures are similar and different. So for example, the way that a feature journalist begins with a specific story of an everyday person kind of seems like the way that ethnographic vignettes come up in anthropological scholarship and in some linguistics as well. Sometimes it seems to have a different kind of a function. And we talked to them about what is the difference between the function of an ethnographic vignette versus the function of a personal story that you would read in a journalistic setting. And then we also talked about some things that are different between the 2 structures. So the so what that you get in a scholarly article might be, this is important because it's unique. No one has ever asked this question before. But the so what that you get in feature journalism is more likely to be, this is important because everyone has experienced it, but no one has really understood it quite like this before. And so the idea of relevance for a specialist versus a non-specialist audience is very different. And so then in the 4th phase, they revise and they publish on our website. And so what you see here is the page where we have the 2020 interns research summaries posted, and I'm going to get the 2021 summaries up as soon as I can. It's understandingmigration.org/research summaries. Oops, and I will post that also into the chat for everyone so that you can check those out if you like. But I want to go back now and consider how we are responding to those sort of key questions that I started with. So number 1, we said we wanted to make our scholarship accessible to lay audiences. And so this is, I'm going to show a couple of excerpts from the article summary about that title that I displayed earlier about health access among the Marshallese population in Arkansas. And so this is from that student's writing. To better understand the health burden and barriers to healthcare access faced by the Marshallese population living in Springdale, Arkansas, anthropologist Michael Dukes gathered information. I'm sorry, I missed something there. Gathered information through participation observation. It's participant observation, but she called it participation observation and interviews. Participation observation is a common research method anthropologists use where they live alongside the people they are studying and observe their behavior. And so she provided that boldface. It's really interesting to me to observe, compared to the feature journalism genre that we showed them, this kind of glossing of terms, especially with the boldface, really reminds me of a textbook, which is the other kind of way that our participants would have been used to reading this kind of content. And so it's interesting to see how they're blending different genres together in their writing. But it is a strategy for making this accessible to lay audiences by sort of keying them in on the technical terminology, but also not shying away from using it. So it's a first step in making those more specialized conversations accessible. The second thing that I said was that the students should be able to see themselves as experts. And so this is from the conclusion of that same piece. She writes, healthcare access is more important than ever right now, especially for the Marshallese community living in Springdale, Arkansas. Cases in the community, and she means cases of COVID-19, are still rising as the governor of Arkansas is moving to reopen, with many Marshallese still lacking appropriate healthcare coverage or access. And so this is notable because the article, if you remember, was written in 2017, but the research summary was written in 2020. And so this is not in the article, it's the student herself making that connection between healthcare access as it existed pre-pandemic, and then what you might observe in the news that's happening now, and to use that scholarship as a platform for advocacy, that she sees herself as being entitled to make this kind of claim based on the literature that she's understood well enough to apply it in this way. And so she's really taking on the expert role there and making suggestions. And then the final piece was that we wanted to show ways that students might see themselves as active participants in our work. And so in this case, I happened to know Michael Duke, and I sent him the writing that she had done, the summary of her article, and he wrote back to her, "Dear Hamna, I am writing to thank you for writing an essay about my article on Marshall Islanders in Arkansas. Daniel Ginsberg from AAA forwarded it to me, and it was very nicely done. You'll be glad to hear that in some sense, things are better for the Marshallese in terms of healthcare access." And then he went on to explain a little bit more what's gone on in that field site since the time that he did the research. And then he concluded his letter, "Best of luck in your academic career." And so I think this, to me, it felt like we had hit a home run, because this is a student who's coming to us really as a novice. And by the end of this 4-week period, she's being included as a colleague by, faculty in anthropology departments, or he might be in a public health department or something now. But the point is that she's participating in that conversation, and that this is something that, for a discovery major like anthropology, like linguistics, when she goes off to college and has to declare a major, she'll have this experience of already having been included as a colleague, rather than somebody who just decides to major in anthropology because it's the first subject in the alphabet when they look at the course catalog. And so that's huge in terms of broadening access and participation in the discipline. So I'm going to leave it there. I want to say thanks to, these are the teachers, Robert Summers, Michael Hoffman, Megan Chinsey are the anthropology teachers of the interns, and they were in many cases the bridge that brought them to us. I want to thank Michael Duke. I want to thank my colleagues on AAA staff, but most of all, I want to thank the high school interns. That's Hamna Shafiq from Washington Liberty High School, Arlington, Virginia, Jen Dispensary from Kittatinny Regional High School in Newton, New Jersey, Amadea Escobar from Calhoun School in New York City, and Danielle Halperin from Horace Greeley High School in Chappaqua, New York. And we will be accepting applications for our 2022 internship soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all the panelists, and thank you all for attending. So we do have 10 minutes for questions. So I would like to just open that up for questions so that participants have a chance to talk with you all. Or comments. Elizabeth.
Hi, great presentations. Thank you so much to all the presenters. This was eye-opening for me, for sure. I had a particular question for Tatiana and Nick in talking about making students more aware of language and linguistics. Do you ever, I don't know the geography of where you're doing your studies and classes, but do you ever consider using the linguistic landscape to point out signs and how language is used by the community or for the community in the places where your schools are?
I can start and then, sorry, both computers had sound on. I'm gonna start and have then and they kind of add on. So we're in just outside of Cleveland, Ohio. And we do, we try to use the community and what's out there. We do start, and I'm not sure if that's exactly what you're asking. So we certainly draw on the languages present in the community. We survey our faculty and our student body to find out what languages are spoken in the families and the homes. And we have some of the speakers we have come in are just our colleagues and people who work at school who have linguistic experiences that could be different from what students would expect. Do you wanna?
And I think, I think one of the other things that in terms of a wider geographical area that we've brainstormed about but haven't really come up with anything was to engage the Amish population that isn't far from us. So coming up with ways to establish connections with them in a way that would seem like a natural extension from what we're covering in class. So if anyone has ideas on that, we'd love to hear.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. You can also put things in the chat, or you can raise your hand and unmute yourselves to. And I put it in here in the chat if you want, presenters, if you want to put your email contact information in the chat. I know we're recording the session. Maybe I should stop the recording at this point. I'll stop the recording.